May 2nd, 2011. A pair of helicopters carrying 23 Navy SEALs, a combat dog, and an interpreter descend over Abbottabad in Pakistan. This is the location the United States believes is home to Osama bin Laden, the mastermind behind the 9/11 attack. The SEALs on board are all part of the Red Squadron of Navy SEAL Team 6. They've been chosen for this raid because they'd recently returned from operations in Afghanistan. Their leave was suddenly canceled. But this worked out in their favor, as they were able to rehearse without attracting any unwanted media attention. Still, rehearsals can't account for everything, with the team experiencing an unanticipated issue as they reached the compound. One of the helicopters destabilized, forcing a hard landing. Nobody was harmed, and the Navy SEALs were able to continue their mission as planned. Once inside the compound, a team of SEALs makes their way to a guest house in which they believe bin Laden's couriers live. As they prepare to blow the door, they're fired upon from inside. First contact. The SEALs return fire before opening the door to discover the body of Abu Ahmad al-Kuwaiti. Bin Laden's primary courier is dead. At the same time, a second team of SEALs has penetrated the compound's main building, where they've killed a second courier and that courier's wife, as well as Khalid bin Laden. Osama is the only target left. After making their way up to the third floor of the main building, the SEALs break through Osama's door, shooting him dead in his room. But their work isn't over. After collecting electronics, documents, and any other materials that American intelligence teams will find useful, both teams make their way back outside. There, they blow up the helicopter that had been forced to make a hard landing, destroying its stealth technology. Then they board the remaining helicopter along with bin Laden's body and the documents they've gathered to make their escape. The entire operation took just 45 minutes, with the SEALs being in and out before Pakistani authorities were able to mobilize a response. It's the perfect demonstration of the capabilities of a U.S. Special Operations Force, or SOF. These SOFs are the groups the U.S. military has in place to conduct special operations for which the standard military isn't capable. These SOFs are filled with soldiers who are specially trained in specific techniques and equipped with the best equipment the U.S. military has to offer. To many on that day in 2011, they became legends of the American Armed Forces. But what if the raid happened today? How strong are the U.S. Special Forces in 2024? There are 9 we'll cover in this video, including the Green Berets, Night Stalkers, Army Rangers, Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Navy SWCCs, Marine MARSOC, Marine Force Recon, and Air Force Special Tactics Group. So, to answer the question of how strong America's Special Forces are, we need to dig into each of these groups, what they do, and what they represent for the U.S. military. We'll start with the Army Green Berets. The Green Berets are typically tasked with fighting against terrorists by employing guerrilla warfare-style techniques. They usually operate in foreign countries, though they're trained to fight in practically any environment, ranging from dense jungle to expansive urban sprawl. Unconventional warfare is the group's modus operandi, and it's typically employed to help foreign countries improve their internal defenses and conduct special recon missions. Though a soldier can technically qualify for the Green Berets straight from basic training, typically by undergoing specialist training on top of basic, most come from the U.S. military's enlisted soldiers. To be eligible, an enlisted soldier must have a pay grade of E3 or above, meaning they're on the 3rd level of the enlisted soldier's pay scale and are qualified to receive secret clearance. SOPC includes an initial 2-week trial in which candidates are vetted, with the following 61 weeks reserved for those who make it past the first 2. The Green Berets are among the largest of America's SOFs, with the branch typically having 5,500 active duty members at any one time, along with about 1,100 who serve with the National Guard. However powerful as this SOF may be, it's been struggling with recruitment in recent years. That's according to military.com, which notes that 2022 saw the Green Berets attract just 779 recruits, compared to the 1,358 it attracted in 2021. Still, it's a formidable force that brings a high level of versatility to the U.S. Special Forces. Next up, the Army Night Stalkers. This is the name given to the members of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, all of whom are extremely talented aviators. Their primary role is to run nighttime operations internationally using helicopters, such as the assault on bin Laden's compound. While the Navy SEALs took the headlines in that assault, it was the Night Stalkers pilots who got the SEALs in and out of bin Laden's compound. As for the SOF, it contains 4 battalions, and it calls Fort Campbell in Kentucky its regimental headquarters. Combined, the 4 battalions include 2,700 members, including support personnel, with each battalion having access to highly modified light, medium, and heavy choppers to ensure the versatility needed to take on a wide array of missions. As the United States Army Special Operations Command puts it, a member of the Night Stalkers is a 3-time volunteer. First for the U.S. Army, then airborne training, and then once again for the regiment. So we've already been seeing a pretty comprehensive collection of special forces to start from. The Green Berets handle the complex operations in foreign countries on the ground, with the Night Stalkers playing a key role in getting other SOF members in and out of operational locations. The third of the U.S. Army's SOFs is the Army Rangers. Train, endure, overcome. Those 3 words serve as the 75th Ranger Regiment's motto, and they're needed as the SOF handles a range of operations. These include special raids behind enemy lines, in which they seize or destroy targets. Forcible entry falls under their remit, with a particular focus on taking control of airports and similar large complexes, with gathering intelligence on enemies via reconnaissance also a key Army Ranger task. Then comes the training. The U.S. Army website says the training is split into 3 phases: Benning, Mountain, and Florida. In Benning, the prospective Army Ranger learns the tactical fundamentals needed to be a part of the crew and undergo tests of their physical stamina. From there, they move into the Mountain phase, where they're stationed at Camp Frank D. Merrill to learn about military mountaineering and various techniques for employing platoons in mountain environments. Finally, they move into the Florida phase, switching the training focus to waterborne operations, with stream crossings and small boat techniques coming into play. As for the SOF's manpower, it's typically around 3,500 people strong, with a small contingent of civilian support personnel. Each member of the Army Rangers has completed its brutal training regimen and will often be responsible for spearheading the American attack into new territory. Through the Army Rangers, the U.S. military special forces add versatility and key skills in ground-based operations. But what if the United States needs to deal with a specific terrorist threat? That's where the famous Delta Force comes into play. Also known as the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, Delta Force is an extremely secretive unit that typically handles America's covert counterterrorism needs. This includes handling covert raids, rescuing hostages, and in some cases direct combat engagement on the ground. The organization finds its roots in the Green Berets, having been founded by a former Green Beret named Charlie Beckwith, as well as in the United Kingdom Special Air Service, or SAS. Having worked with the SAS in Malaya, Beckwith noted that the U.S. needed a special forces organization composed of small and agile groups that could handle delicate operations. Delta Force was born. Delta Force often pulls its members from other SOFs, including the Army Rangers and Green Berets, though any soldier aged 21 who's actively serving in the U.S. Army, in the National Guard, or part of the reserves can apply. The candidate needs to have airborne qualifications or be willing to study for them, and must have a near-spotless disciplinary record. Assuming he meets the criteria, the candidate then completes a 4-week training course that's modeled after SAS training. This course includes a timed 18-mile ruck march, in which the candidate hauls a 35-pound rucksack while navigating through unforgiving terrain at night. Another 40-mile march sees them carrying a 45-pound rucksack in steep terrain. There's more. The few who pass this selection process enter the Operations Training Course, which lasts 6 months and is designed to turn a raw recruit into a Delta operator. After that, they're assigned to a Delta Force squadron, and they're ready to go. As for the squadrons, Delta Force has 4 primary assault groups, labeled A to D, each of which has 75 members that split into 3 25-person troops. 2 of these troops focus on direct action, such as the hostage rescues mentioned earlier, with the other handling reconnaissance, sniping, and infiltration. Further segmentation occurs within the troops as Delta Force follows the SAS model by deploying teams of between 2 and 6 people during operations. Delta Force has several secondary squadrons, including Squadron E, to handle aerial operations. Members of that squadron often fly MH-60 Blackhawks, MH-47 Chinooks, and MH-6 Little Birds during operations. Other tertiary squadrons focus on training and intelligence, with the standout being the Computer Network Operations Squadron, or CNOS, which handles computer hacking and cybersecurity operations. Typically, Delta Force will have around 2,000 members at any one time, though only between 200 and 300 of those members will be operators who get assigned to combat missions. If that all sounds like Delta Force would be well suited to taking out Osama bin Laden, then you'd be right. It shares the same counterterrorism goals as the Navy SEALs. And with that, we'll move on to the SOF that opened the video. The Navy SEALs handle a range of counterterrorism operations, focusing on inserting and extracting soldiers by sea, land, or air. They're often deployed when the United States needs to take out or capture high-value enemy targets, such as the previously mentioned bin Laden. And like Delta Force, they're usually deployed on covert operations that require a great degree of training and secrecy. President John F. Kennedy established the SEALs in 1962 to offer the U.S. military an agile maritime force that could handle aspects of unconventional warfare. Like Delta Force, SEALs usually deploy in small units to take out specific targets, though they'll also handle underwater reconnaissance and clearing routes to enable larger forces to conduct amphibious landings. Becoming a SEAL is no easy task. The initial entry criteria includes achieving a strong ASVAB score and meeting eyesight requirements. Candidates can't be colorblind and must have 20/40 vision in their best eye and 20/70 or better in their worst. There is an age cutoff. Candidates can be no older than 28, and all candidates must pass a physical exam designed for divers. Then the training starts. After passing through Recruit Training Command, also known as boot camp, the recruit completes a 12-month training course that includes BUD school, underwater demolitions training, and parachute jump school. During those 12 months, the candidate endures the brutal Hell Week, which NavySeals.com calls the defining event of BUD's training. Over 5.5 days, the candidate has their mental and physical endurance tested, often while operating on less than 4 hours sleep. Running, swimming, carrying boards, and paddling are constant, as are physical exercises. This week is designed to push the candidate to their physical limits, but the mental challenge is often the toughest to handle. The SEALs want to know how their candidates can handle being exhausted, soaking wet, and approaching hypothermia. As for the SOF strength, the Navy SEALs accounts for about 1% of the U.S. Navy's personnel and will usually have around 2,450 operators at their disposal. By now, you're starting to see a trend. Each of these SOFs is a relatively small force trained to an elite level to cause maximum damage to the enemy. But in the case of the SEALs, it's not just the SEALs themselves who an enemy has to worry about. It's the SOFs that support the SEALs. And that brings us to the Navy SEALs mission, or more famously, SEAL Team 6. A special team within the Navy SEALs, SEAL Team 6 was founded following the Iran hostage crisis, in which Iranian students seized the U.S. embassy in their country and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. The low point of that crisis was an attempted rescue of the hostages in 1980, in which an SOF was supposed to fly in, extract the hostages, and fly out. It failed spectacularly. 2 of the 8 helicopters on the mission malfunctioned before arriving at the staging area, with another breaking down once it was on site. The SOF decided to withdraw, only to see one of the operational helicopters collide with a support craft, killing 8 soldiers. The debacle forced a rethink in how the U.S. military carries out hostage extractions, with SEAL Team 6 being born from that rethink. Specifically, the aftermath of the failure of Operation Eagle Claw in 1980. Technically, the group no longer exists. It was disbanded and absorbed into the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, or DevGRU, in 1987. But the SEAL Team 6 moniker has stuck, because, let's be honest, it's cooler and catchier than DevGRU. And today it's a unit of around 300 Navy SEALs divided into 4 line squadrons: red, blue, gold, and silver. Each of those squadrons contains about 50 operators who are divided into 3 groups and then divided again into teams of assaulters and snipers. There are also suggestions that SEAL Team 6 has a gray squadron, which is dedicated to maritime operations, as well as a black squadron, which handles reconnaissance and surveillance. So think of SEAL Team 6 as an SOF within an SOF. It's the arm of the Navy SEALs that handles hostage extractions, though it's also often used in counterterrorism operations and even to protect VIPs in sensitive situations. But that's not the only SOF that's adjacent to the SEALs. There's also the Naval Special Warfare Combat Crewmen, or Navy SWCCs. For a Navy SEAL to conduct their counterterrorism operations, they need people to insert and extract them. We saw that in the operation to kill bin Laden, as the SEALs worked alongside the Night Stalkers to enter the Al-Qaeda leader's compound. For amphibious insertions, that task falls to the SWCCs. They operate the small vessels that get the SEALs in and out of areas and handle a lot of intelligence gathering needed for such missions. That includes tracking shipping traffic and gathering information about enemy military installations. The SWCC also takes part in direct raids, typically focusing on waterborne threats and enemy shipping, as well as handling all the maintenance needed for the ordnance systems, electronics, and small boats required for special operations missions. Think of them as a supporting SOF. To become an SWCC member, a candidate must complete boot camp at Recruit Training Command before moving on to a specially designed training course. This includes 2 weeks of indoctrination held in Coronado, California, in which the candidate is prepared for physical and psychological trials that lie ahead. Next up is a 5-week basic crew member training course, covering basic water competency and boat handling. Then comes full crewman qualification training, a 15-week course covering the advanced skills and tactical understanding an SWCC member needs to have for their role in special missions. Though closely associated with the Navy SEALs, the SWCC supports any SOF that requires amphibious entry to and extraction from a target. They are an elite force. There are always 600 active-duty SWCC operators at any one time, with a further 125 reserves. Sticking with the U.S. Navy, we move on to the SOFs that are part of the U.S. Marines. First up, Marine MARSOC, otherwise known as the Marine Raiders. Founded in February 2006, MARSOC is another SOF that's capable of conducting counter-terrorist operations, as well as engaging in reconnaissance and direct action against hostile forces. However, the reason it was founded, and one of its primary tasks, is to offer foreign internal defense. This involves working alongside foreign governments and their militaries to train them in the skills they need to maintain their own national security. So, we see another aspect of U.S. SOFs emerge. While most of these groups focus on conducting operations to protect the U.S., with MARSOC being no different in some respects, the Marine Raiders have a secondary role that allows the U.S. to build stronger ties with other countries. Those relationships protect the U.S. even further, as having allies in far-flung places is always advantageous. As for getting into MARSOC, a candidate first has to complete the organization's assessment and selection phase, which is essentially a test of their physical and mental acumen. From there, they enter a 4-phase, 30-week training program that covers the basic skills they'll need to survive in the SOF, followed by small unit tactics, close quarters battle strategy, and aspects of irregular warfare. Assuming the candidate passes, they join a team of around 3,500 people, 1,000 of whom are active Marine Raiders. The rest are civilians and support personnel, though it's typical for all who serve with MARSOC to be referred to as a Marine Raider, regardless of whether they've completed MARSOC training. Next up, Marine Force Recon. Though many of the U.S. Marines Force Recon personnel have been integrated into MARSOC, the Marines still maintain several dedicated units that are, as the name implies, focused on gathering battlefield intelligence. Think of Force Recon as the SOF that shapes the battlefield. Their members handle scout swimming, small boat operations, and coastline reconnaissance, gathering intelligence that other SOFs use in their operations. Then there are the Green operations. These combine ground and amphibious reconnaissance, with Force Recon usually gathering information about targets before reporting that information to their commanders. The difference with these missions is that the Force Recon soldiers go deep into enemy territory. Often their work places them beyond the boundaries of support that would otherwise be offered by artillery or naval gunfire, meaning stealth is a key weapon in a Force Recon member's arsenal. It's an even more important weapon than the member's actual weapons. If a Force Recon soldier has to fire their gun, they've failed to carry out their mission properly. The information these special operators gather can mean the difference between success and failure in a military operation. Currently, Force Recon has 835 members, divided into 5 167-member companies. 3 are on active duty, allowing 1 per Marine Expeditionary Force. The other 2 teams are kept in reserve. Finally, there's Air Force Special Tactics, otherwise known as the 24th Special Operations Wing. An array of units fall under this banner, including the 720th Special Tactics Group, the 724th Special Tactics Group, and a host of overseas squadrons. Collectively, these units are responsible for most of the aerial support other SOFs require and aiding the wider U.S. military. The group's website divides its operations into 4 distinct categories. First up, Global Access. Whenever the United States or one of its allies needs to set up a landing zone or airport, Air Force Special Tactics is usually involved. It handles the assessment and opening of these locations, regardless of whether they're in peaceful or hostile territory, ensuring the U.S. military has the facilities it needs to enable aerial access to a location. Air Force Special Tactics also handles precision strikes, and that's exactly what it sounds like. The SOF coordinates with aerial teams to direct munitions to targets. However, this category has a secondary aspect in which the SOF also uses its skills to direct humanitarian aid to appropriate locations. Here we see a similar spirit of international cooperation as we see in MARSOC's work with foreign governments. Air Force Special Tactics is as important for helping the U.S. build alliances as it is in supporting the U.S. Air Force in its strikes. Next, personnel recovery. Like several of the other SOFs we've examined so far, Air Force Special Tactics maintains teams capable of extracting people from difficult positions. Its people handle mission planning and coordinate the technical aspects of aerial rescues. It's also the treatment side, with this arm of the SOF containing specially trained medical personnel who can help those being extracted while they're in an aircraft. Building on that medical aspect, there is the final category of battlefield surgery. Air Force Special Tactics maintains Special Operations Surgical Teams, or SOSTs, which are lightweight units of mobile medical specialists who are capable of performing life-saving surgery anywhere. SOSTs are often deployed ahead of traditional medical personnel and will enter combat zones with tailored backpacks that allow them to operate with a much smaller footprint than other SOFs. These teams usually only contain 6 members, with their job simply being to keep the injured alive as they await extraction. With such a wide-ranging remit, it's difficult to find information about the specific training that members of this SOF undergo. Some will focus more on flying, while others are more heavily trained in medicine. Still, the SOF maintains 1,580 personnel, about 1,450 of whom are military versus around 130 civilians. So where does all this leave us in terms of assessing the strength of America's Special Forces in 2024? It's clear that the U.S. Special Forces can handle practically any mission due to the large number of SOFs it maintains. Versatility is the key word here. Teams are trained in everything from conducting counter-terrorist strikes on the ground to gathering intelligence and direct combatants in the field. Perhaps that's just the most important thing to understand about the U.S. Special Forces. They aren't just one group of soldiers who all go through the same training. There are several groups, each with their own specializations and each capable of cooperating with others on joint operations. Their training has been refined, often over the course of decades, and as the operation to kill bin Laden proves, each of these SOFs can be deadly effective when called upon. Now check out this video, U.S. Special Forces versus Wagner Group, Battle of Kashan.